We're going to go to phones here in about 20 minutes for your questions, your horror stories. We will get into my little run-in with a drone today, and I have video of it. So we're going to air the audio of that and the video here on the radio. Obviously, the video works better, but there's an interview, too, coming up in about an hour. Here it is. Deed, who really owns your home? Over 700,000, or is that 70 million?
70 million.
Yeah, 70 million titles. I can read that. It's so big. To property are clouded. Is yours one of them? This book could help you find out and fix it. In fact, I use information similar to this book to make sure with my house that I had that. And it goes on to break it all down. Clouded titles, new updated edition with case studies and sites. And Dave Krieger is our guest. It's available at InfoWarsShop.com. As I was saying, invaluable book to have. Okay, Dave, this is a short segment, long segment coming up. Break down how the scam worked, what happened, what Mirrors is, and then let's get into the usual suspect. I mean, it seems like everything. The Attorney General's involved in it, even back during Clinton with his law firm, when he was Deputy Attorney General, getting all this changed, where this is going. And then let's get into the Patriot mythology, getting a lot of people in trouble versus real stuff that's in your book. And then let's take phone calls.
Sure. Well, Alex, the thing started in 1995. It was a concept of how can we basically control and track and transfer these mortgage notes on Wall Street. And so Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the Mortgage Bankers Association, American Land Title Association, and all the major banks got together and came up with a game plan, and they got Covington and Burling, a law firm in Washington, D.C., to issue an opinion letter. And basically what it did was it gave what we call Mortgage Electronic Registration Systems, or MERS, credence to do what it's doing in America. And what, in essence, happens is that when you go to the closing table and you sign this piece of paper, which represents a mortgage or deed of trust, there's an 18-digit MIN number or MERS identification number that is the property of MERS Corp Holdings, Inc. that appears near the document title. And the things that we've been trying to do is to get people to recognize this, which is one of the fundamental reasons I wrote the book, because, you know, if you knew what the consequences were of getting a MERS loan or MERS mortgage, MERS doesn't have anything to do with the actual mortgage note itself. MERS actually only is a computer database that, for all intents and purposes, tracks the sales of these repetitively as they occur on Wall Street between the parties. The unfortunate thing about MERS, which it admits, by the way, is that it is not a substitute for the land records. All it is an electronic database that is used by its membership subscribers, which is kind of like the credit bureaus. If you ever wonder who inputs the data on the credit reports, well, this is all these member subscribers of the credit bureaus that have access to this information. And the credit bureau is entrusted through the Fair Credit Reporting Act to basically keep track and make sure that everything that's being reported is accurate, which is why we have the dispute process. You know, to look at it just the opposite, MERS does not have this kind of government regulation, as do the banks. So it's not a real deed registration. Exactly.
They created it so they could run these scams and sell the deeds over and over again.
Well, they sell the mortgage notes over and over again.
Exactly. So how many times? Exactly. But I mean, it's the same. I mean, the same thing in the final equation, though, isn't it?
Well, actually, no. Your mortgage note, it was really sad to hear that. I mean,
I know they're two different things, but they come back to court and try to take your house with it.
Exactly. Well, they try to come with part of the equation, not all of it. And this is one of the things that the attorneys who are studying this stuff and are sharing this information with me are telling me, is that they're trying to get the entire equation put together and do it in such a way that the judge will believe it. Because right now...
So they're engaged in perjury and fraud, and constructive fraud. But the issue here is that for years now, they're getting their clocks cleaned in courts all over the place. And that's what you break down in your book.
A lot of them have been. We've had a few significant cases where the homeowners have won. And we just had a RICO-style action happen down in the Gulf Coast of Florida. We have an appellate attorney down there in Englewood that actually won a case. It's Elizabeth Corson, and you know, it's been circulating around the internet. And I'm sure if you type in Corson, C-O-U-R-S-E-N, you'll see that case. We actually defeated a motion to dismiss there on the appellate level. Basically, we reversed it. So, you know, we're having a few victories, and then, of course, we have some of the sad consequences of what happens to people when they go in and they try and fight this thing on their own, and they file documents in the land records that are not appropriate. And as I was sharing with you before we went on the air, Alex, this woman in California filed a document in the land records in an attempt to stop a foreclosure of her parents' home. And now she was convicted of 2 felony counts and sentenced to a year in jail.
Yeah, stay there. We're going to come back and break that down, because there are people out there on the internet that will tell you to do stuff like this. This is the power of common law. You're filing and swearing to something, and let me tell you, it's fraud if it's not true. Now, the banks are doing it, but just because they're engaged in fraud doesn't mean we now run to beat them and engage in fraud. So we're going to break down the right way to do it versus the wrong way and take your phone calls. Stay with us.
We're on the march. The empire's on the run.
Dave Krieger is our guest in studio. You have literally hundreds of trillions of dollars worldwide by the Chinese government, Russian government, European governments, pension funds. And this is also done in Europe to some extent. It's not as bad as here, but some countries even worse, from what I've read, to where it's all just fraudulent. I remember they make you put money in escrow to pay your property taxes. The first house, like 14 years ago, I moved into. It was a little bitty house, and I had put my money in, and about a year later, I was told your mortgage has been sold 2 or 3 times. It's finally Bank of America. Every few months, it was a new place to, back then it was actually send a check in. And then they said, you don't have $3,000 or whatever it was in escrow, and I went and checked the records. We did. They'd taken the money, and they were letting me know they were starting proceedings to take the house that I'd put money down on and been paying on for a year and a half or so. And I had to go get a lawyer and send them a letter and threaten Bank of America. But imagine old ladies or people that don't know what they're doing. And I'm certainly no rocket scientist, especially 14 years ago. I've learned a lot since then. But you see the cases on the news. I mean, we've played these here for like CNN, where they took in Florida a $1.2 million house that had been paid for a decade plus before with cash, never had a securitized note that had been sold out in the market. Explain this to people, and let's get in, as you were, to the patriot mythology. Some of the stuff where declare yourself a sovereign of the realm of the Lord and file it, and then they'll just come arrest you. Because that's no different than what the bankers are doing. If they're engaged in fraud, you don't go file something else. You need to get this book, folks, because this has got a bunch of the cases that have actually succeeded. And there's different types of fraud going on. But please continue, Dave.
Alex, stuff changes all the time. And the scenario sometimes gets very ugly. We see cases like the one in Stanislaus County, California, where the woman is trying to protect her parents' house. It's in the final stages of foreclosure. And, these well-meaning souls out there, I call them patriot paralegals, type up these documents thinking that they can use the UCC, common law, and basically they move outside of the system's tools to attempt to enforce their way on the system.
And the system immediately recognizes that it's not within, kosher systems. Exactly,
and this is what causes the problems. And as a result of her filing these documents in Stanislaus County, the district attorney had her prosecuted. We've had numerous instances that I've run across in the state of Texas, where somebody has gone in and written and filed affidavits after the trustee's deed. The property was foreclosed on, it was sold, the trustee's deed was filed, and so instead of fighting it at the detainer hearing, which would be the next thing, let's kick you out of your house, and so we have to go do what we call a forcible detainer hearing. And what ends up happening is this particular person files a whole series of documents, starting with an affidavit, rescinding everything that's already been foreclosed on. Well, it's a little late for that. And when she went to the county clerk to record it, there was somebody who didn't even work in the clerk's office that looked at the documentation and said, I don't think I'd file that stuff if I were you. She went ahead and did it anyway. And when I got to looking at it, I was just like scratching my head going, this is paralleling the case in Stanislaus County. A judge literally could throw the...
Well, I mean, there are a bunch of scammers. I know a bunch of patriot paralegals who are winning in court and are having success, but they're following cases that have won. They're following, systems that are there. So there is success there as well, but there's a bunch of lawyers. I mean, I've seen countless cases now that are having victories. The point is, you want to go with real instruments that point out the fraud the bankers are engaged in. Don't counter their fraud with your own made-up garbage.
Well, look at the county land records as a sacred vault of documents that basically represent a person's chain of title from the time they took possession of it and were given a warranty deed all the way up to the current state and condition of title. And through these chain of title assessment seminars and stuff that I do, I teach people to go in and analyze step by step from the warranty deed forward to see how many times the chain of title has been affected. One of the things we're seeing is the more you go out and borrow and refi and get a HELOC and refi, the worse condition the chain of title becomes, because you have more outside third parties interfering in the chain and filing documents that appear to be legitimate when they're anything but.
Well, let me ask you this. How bad does it get? Because I've had different economists and experts and lawyers on, some of the lawyers that have won in court that you mentioned in your book, and they talk about how many times in derivatives these securitized loans are being sold and the fraud that these groups are holding. How many times are they selling these titles on average?
Well, the notes are basically on Wall Street, Alex, are being taken and spun over anywhere from 9 to 30 times, maybe more. We don't know because they're hidden in the MERS system. The MERS electronic database keeps track of all the transfers, but none of these are recorded in the land records, and this is what's causing the problems with the 70 chains of title.
And they come take houses in some cases, not just where you're behind and then they fraudulently do it, where they just take houses that they never even had anything to.
Well, it could have been because of the fact that when they and I was talking to a title guy in Cleveland yesterday, and he told me that we see a lot of problems and mistakes that were done because somebody who was preparing the warranty deed put the wrong legal description on, and they basically, when they filed the warranty deed, all of a sudden it looked like that there could be a potential slander of someone else's title. And so when you're looking at a legal description that all of a sudden should say lot 6, block 7, but it says, because of the fact that, you know, they were having a bad day and looked cross-eyed at the computer, didn't have enough coffee, and hit lot 7, block 7, all of a sudden now we have a lien on the wrong property. And this is where you see a lot of this back.
Oh, yeah, I saw cases, speaking in California, in L.A., they're now having thousands of cases a year of innocent people being arrested because they just put your name in a bank robber or a child molester's area, and now your life's ruined. And it's so, it's so Byzantine that no one can fix it.
It's going to take at least a century to fix this problem if we can stop MERS now. And I do know that there is a movement afoot by many legislatures to try to cut the MERS equation out of the recordation process in
But then what does that do to all the derivatives based on it worldwide?
Well, the derivatives generally don't have anything to do with what's in the land records. They're two distinct entities. But, I mean, you literally could go out if you wanted to, if it was available. You literally could bet against the weather. You could say, well, you know what? I know that it's going to rain tomorrow, but I'm going to bet against the fact it's going to rain, bet that it's going to be sunny, so that when it comes to find out that it's not sunny, I'm going to collect. I'm going to go in and I'm going to collect on that bet. This is kind of what they did when they structured these loans.
No, I know, but I mean, if MERS goes under, they'll lose even more of the cases. My point is, all this fraud is based on this fraudulent filing system. So, and from what I've read, the big banks are still doing this.
Yes, they are, and this is a thing that we have to, you know, the only thing I could do because I can't give you legal advice. I'm a paralegal. I'm not an attorney. But having looked at this from a journalist perspective, the only thing that we can do is say no to MERS mortgages. Just say, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to sign any mortgage paperwork if MERS is involved.
So anybody that's going to buy a house, anyone that's going to sell a house, refi, or that already has a house with a mortgage, you need to get the book Clouded Titles at InfoWarsShop.com and read it. It's amazing. Now, continuing here, what are some of the other, well, first off, here's the toll-free number. If you have a horror story, if you have a question that he can generally speak to, because even when I have lawyers on, they're not going to speak to your case because they don't know the particulars. So we can't give legal advice, but just general comments or what you would do if you have horror stories or stories in your family or questions or comments or success stories. We'd love to hear from you. The toll-free number to join us is 800-259-9231, 800-259-9231. This is a big deal. It affects our whole economy. Clouded Titles, Dave Krieger, and the book, 800-259-9231. We'll start going to your calls coming up in the next segment. Take about 40 minutes of calls. Continuing, what are some of the other patriot mythology things? Because, I mean, people call me, they send me, on air for 17 years, they send me these big stacks of legalese, and if I just announce this and that and file this, and I file magically bond money that's under my Social Security number will be sent to me, and, you know, I hear these talk show hosts, you know, they're going to file $1 billion lien on this or that, and of course, nothing ever really succeeds. But it's almost like magic. It's almost like